I'm downtown today doing a very purposeful exercise, one that I do quite often, and that's just walking the streets of my downtown looking at the exteriors of buildings. What I'm doing is sharpening my spear. I'm physically going to walk every street in this downtown urban area. I'm looking at doors, windows, flashing that's accessible. I'm looking at the siding materials, because today I'm going to see 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 different types of siding materials that I might not typically see for months when doing commercial inspections. And I need to be ready. I need to be at the top of my game when I start doing inspections for clients. And so walking around my downtown is the best thing I can do. On top of that, I'm going to also concentrate on, for you guys, looking at the exterior section of the CommSop. And so with that, let's go start a little bit further down the street and let's see what we get to see. I stopped here to take a look at this stucco material. In this stucco, I know it's a hard coat stucco. When I push on it, it's got a cementitious feel. On top of that, there might be a little foam layer underneath of it, but I'm looking for control joints. I'm looking for cracks. I'm looking for any openings or any blemishes that might be present on it. But what I did notice right here at the bottom of this stucco, I've got this flashing. See how the flashing is tilted backwards towards the building? So as water cascades down the side of this building, it's going to go into this flashing and into this wall. What's nice is we do have this nice block stone down here. We do have some very nice weep holes with the screeds in them, and we do have a nice piece of flashing that's going to direct the water out. But I'm worried that if I was inspecting this building, what's going on inside? So this would definitely be a spot that when I was inside this building, I would try to take a memory point of this so that I could check for moisture on the inside of the walls. Let's see what else we can find as we take our walk a little bit further. I haven't gone 50 more yards down the alley here, and we got the hardscapes. We have the concrete here, and we have our paver stone here, creating this beautiful alleyway. But our challenge is, wherever we have the two different materials, they'll always settle differently. This gap right here, this lip, is absolutely a trip hazard. And so if you were inspecting this building, regardless of, because that's not our job to determine who maintains or who has ownership, I'm still going to talk about this trip hazard because I don't want somebody to trip and fall. But if this was on a private property, this is obviously something that you're going to want to take note of. So watch for trip hazards. That's very important on your exterior portion of the inspection. When looking at the thermal seal of a window, we're talking about that seal and that seal that goes between the gap of the two pieces of glass. Inside of that gap is an inert gas. And if that inert gas escapes, then a wetness, a cloudiness, or a condensation can develop. As part of the CommSop, we do not have to inspect the integrity of thermal pane windows, but we should be reporting on obviously fogged windows. So when I look at the windows that are behind my back here, I see that there's a cloudiness between the two panes of glass. That is telling me or giving me an indication that we do have a failure in the integrity of this thermal pane window, and something that I would want to place in my inspection report. When you're doing the exterior of a building, sometimes it can be absolutely overwhelming. There could be so much going on at the same time that you don't know where to start, and you just want to sit down and put your head in your hands and give up. But don't do that. If you take each element of the exterior, especially a masonry building, and take them as a singular element before you include them all together, maybe it's going to be easier to digest. In this building here, I've got old masonry, not as old masonry, and brand new masonry all tied together. But if you remember the basics of plumb, level, square, and straight, that'll begin to develop if there's something going on. And so when I look at this building here, and I'm going to rotate around over here, I'm immediately going to be gazed at all the masonry that's going on above my head. where you can see that there's been so much work done. In fact, this building has been raised up higher, where you can see the outline of the old parapet and the new masonry that's been installed to extend the height of the roof. We can also see that they've actually put in a brand new lintel. The lintel goes over the top of this entry door and the window wall that's next to it. And how we know it's a brand new lintel is when you can look at the bricks that are soldiered up on the top end, see how they're kind of tangled down and decreasing as they're going, and that's showing us that they had to be cut and placed in individually to create that absolutely level lintel that was so critical for making this building right. Now, what's also fun on this building that you can see, if we look at our brick design, you see how we've got our rotated bricks. This is telling me one of my first indications that this is a complete masonry structural wall versus a veneer wall. We have all of our bricks, and then every 6 or 8 courses, we've got that rotated brick. So I would just walk around this building. I'm gonna look for openings. I'm gonna look for plumb, level, square, and straight. And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing I write for my client is the lintel's been replaced and some other brick have been added throughout the years. But beyond that, if I don't have any appreciable damage, any variances in plumb, level, square, and straight, then maybe there's not much you're gonna need to report on for this masonry, other than it has been previously repaired. I want to introduce a new vocabulary word for some of you, and it's called parging. Parging is adding some cementitious layer over the top of masonry for either waterproofing or making pretty. It's kind of like putting peanut butter on top of bread. You smear it all over the side of the building, and it adds not only for beautification, but it adds a waterproofing to the old masonry. I know this is parging because when I look down here at the erosion from this roof drain, I can see the old original masonry. Sometimes people will parge a building because it might be more cost beneficial than tuck pointing the entire building, where we got to grind out all of the mortar joints and add new masonry. So when I look at the parging on this building, again, I'm going to look for plumb, level, square, and straight. And I'm going to look for any unusual cracking. And as I looked at this building, I see a very, very, very large crack that's developed here. And it's coming off of the sill on both sides. And so the key element for me would be to look up this wall vertically, and I'm actually going to try to see if I have this parging escaping off the side of the wall or bulging away. If we don't have it bulging away, then that could be water getting in there and thermally cracking, where as the water freezes it wants to expand out. But we want to definitely identify that this building has been parged, and we definitely want to identify that type of a gaped crack. A type of crack we want to identify is stair-step cracking. A lot of times stair-step cracking is an indication of movement, and when we're looking at stair-step cracking, it kind of follows the contour of the mortar joints and produces a stair-step design. If it is settlement, if there is movement, then you'd actually see where the crack is wider on the top than it is on the bottom, or wider at the bottom than it is on the top. If it's wider on the top, then that means we're rotating outward. If it's wider on the bottom, that means we're moving upward. In this particular case, it's a pretty even crack. It's probably not an appreciable amount of settlement, but on your report, you should still call it a stair-step crack. And in this case, I would say there's a stair-step crack on the north wall of this building. A lintel is a key design element to any masonry building. It's basically, in the wood frame construction world, the header. It's what supports the masonry that is directly above this opening in this doorway. When we look at this lintel here, this is a very old lintel manufactured of wood. And all wood has what's described as modals of elasticity, or a flex factor. So over the course of the last 100 years or so, the flexing of this lintel has caused the cracking that's going on directly above it. So it's really important to remember your plumb, level, square, and straight rules and check to make sure that things like lintels are still sitting level in their frames. And if they're not, you're noting them. I'm noting this crack and I'm noting this lintel. But beyond that, I certainly have on this ancient old building all of these old wood framed windows. These are single pane windows, wood mullions, and puttied in place. I'm certainly going to note the deep cracking that's present as well as the wood deterioration. So let's continue looking at a bunch of exteriors as we head a little bit further south. Let's take a look at the eave on the back of this building. Where not all low slope roofs will have an eave system. In this particular case, I have one. And if I'm looking at this eave, I've got the fascia as the blunt end and I've got the soffit as the underneath side. The soffit in this case is missing in a great deal of this element of this eave system. And so noting that, especially what if this was a restaurant or whatever this building is, that's a spot for rodents, that's a spot for birds, and that's a spot for deterioration. So we want to make sure we look at the entire eave system and noting openings, noting deterioration, and in this case, certainly all these openings in the soffit that's underneath. Here's another example of a parged wall over masonry. Whether you want to call it parging, whether you want to call it stucco, technically it is a stucco material, but the building has been parged because that's what we've done to the masonry. I'm looking at this horizontal crack that's actually bending over, and it actually encompasses all the way around the corner. So our stucco material, our parging, has either come loose and it's sloughing down off the building, or we're getting some water entry in there. But we definitely want to talk about the openings in this material, and they need to be kept well sealed. I'm in front of a very large, solid masonry building. This building is 3 stories tall. And so I've looked at it from a wide gaze, that macro gaze, and now I'm coming up to the micro, and I see these cracks. I see the crack that's coming down through here, and then I have another crack that's coming off of this sill and coming down through here. And when I look at these cracks, I want to try to determine, just non-engineer speak, are these cracks significant in a structural problem where the building is moving? Or are these just cracks that are escaping and happening in the masonry? And one of my key tricks that I use is I follow this crack. It comes down to this stone sill, but you see how it stops at our foundation. So this crack is not reflecting through the foundation. So most of the time, I can't say all of the time, but most of the time, the rule of thumb is if that crack through the masonry is not projecting into the foundation, then it's probably just a crack that's occurring in the masonry. If it was going into the foundation and that foundation was showing that movement, then we've got something that we're definitely going to want to have a greater attention to. So take a look at your cracks, follow them from where they start all the way down to where they stop, and see where they travel through on the way. Hand railings on commercial buildings should be installed on both sides of the stairs. That's the general rule of thumb. And you have to really try to interpret or look at the building. Again, we're not of authority. And so noting something is absolutely the most important thing, and let your client and let all those other people of authority note that. So when I look at the hand railing going down to this lower level club, it's only on one side, not on both sides. And so I'm just going to take a simple photo of it. I'm going to say hand railings are not mounted on both sides. But as a more attuned to the safety issue, when I look at the hand railing that's on our right side, this hand railing here is rendered moderately ineffective. Depending on how much pressure I put on this, I might even be able to take this hand railing down. So look for loose hand railings and verify there's a hand railing on both sides of the stairways. That's probably the most important thing you could do when you're thinking of the safety issues on the exterior of a staircase. While not very common, T111 siding is used on commercial buildings. T111 siding is a plywood material. It is a wood siding. The most important thing to identify on it is make sure it's not deteriorated. So when I look at T111 siding, I'm going to look through the whole mass of it, make sure I don't see any deterioration. It comes in 8-foot long sheets, and so if I have a siding or a wall that is higher than 8 foot, then I'm going to have to put 2 panels together. And those 2 panels together are joined by using a piece of Z flashing so that the water can migrate over the top of each panel and not cascade behind the siding. So when you look at a T111, make sure it's well sealed and coated, and make sure it's not deteriorating. I want to talk about these really old aluminum windows. They're single pane glass. The window is inset into the two frames of aluminum, and they're terribly not efficient. And so if you're in a climate where it gets winter, then you're going to see these in the wintertime completely iced up. But the key is to make sure there's no moisture going in. So you want to definitely look on the inside as well as the outside of these windows when you're doing your inspection. But beyond this large massive window, there's two items that I want to talk about here, and that's this low irregular height step. It's not only an accessibility or a barrier to accessibility where somebody can't get into this building if they need to, but it's also a trip hazard to an able person because it is not the height of a regular step. It is an irregular height, and that is considered a trip hazard. So part of the CompSop is to verify barriers to accessibility, and that's one. We should also look for trip hazards. That would be two. Commercial buildings don't often manifest huge structural issues, but I have an issue on this building here, and it's an issue and a variance going on with plumb. And so when I'm walking through this building and I'm looking at this, I have this masonry wall here, and I can see where this knee portion or this lower portion has been kicked out 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch out of plumb. And so when that whole wall is moving, it's actually tilting this entire window wall outwards towards our street. It's tough to see, but you can actually, if you stand back and look at it from all angles, which is the key part of every inspection, don't just look at it from one angle. Look at all four corners, look at all four sides. And when you can put all that picture together, you can actually see where this is kicking out. We're probably not going to see anything on the inside of the building. We're probably not going to see anything around the corner of this building. But what we are going to be able to tell the client is this wall is no longer plumb. Now they're going to ask you for a solution. That's not our job. We don't have to deal with causation, and we don't have to give solutions. But you can certainly tell them that this is a window wall. This is not part of the structure. Our structure is all above us with the lintel and the structure of the masonry that's above us. And so if they have a concern, they could rebuild this. But plumb level, square and straight has to be a takeaway from every inspection you perform. You're kind of in a little bit of a quandary on what to call certain things, whether this is a soffit and an eave area, or is this an awning? Doesn't matter what you call it and where you call it. That plywood underneath this overhang has deterioration. So noting this deterioration is important, but I think what's even more important is to erect your ladder right here and look above, because that water has to come from someplace. Water doesn't go this way, it goes this way. So you definitely want to make sure you look above, in whatever means you're going to do to look above. But noting this water damage and looking above would be another key element to your exterior inspection. In the course of your exterior inspection, awnings are part of our inspection. It's part of the exterior. I've got an awning here on this building that has not been extended outwards. Now you can make whatever determination you want to make. We're not required to extend or find the pole and extend out this awning. So if this was my inspection, and let's say I don't have the owner of the building present, I'm not going to exercise this awning. I'm going to take a photograph of this awning in its closed state and say the awning has not been extended, period. If you want to ask somebody to extend the awning, that is well up to your own personal purview. But for sure, document what you did and what you didn't do on your inspections. In my case, I did not extend the awning. Depending on your vernacular, I mean, I'm kind of a silly type of guy, and so we want to protect our building from varmints. They could be pigeons, they could be squirrels, they could be just about anything you can think of. This building here has had an ongoing issue, obviously, with unwelcomed guests. And so they've gone up here and placed in netting to prevent anything from getting up into that eave area, into that low area, as well as they've got bird spikes up on the building. And so that's not part of our inspection. But if you, doing your inspection, wanted to take photos of it, I think it's great. Me, I'd take one general photo of the whole thing and say that you've got pigeon control or whatever you want to call it present. But then I would also note that if it was ripped anywhere, because I think the ripped would be abnormal and this would be a normal situation. So that's what I would put on my report, any ripped areas, but for sure I just have a photo of it with just a description saying pigeon control present. When performing your window inspection, remember the COMSOP. You only have to inspect the representative number of windows visible from the ground. And so you got to think about what's accessible, what's not accessible. And that's really what's going to determine how high a building you're going to be comfortable inspecting as well. And make sure that you tell your client what you did and didn't do. Now in this particular case, when I look at these windows, I've got the modern aluminum frame, I've got a modern window glass inset in that frame, and this gasket that's right here is what's holding the window in place, as well as creating the watertight seal. So as water cascades down this glass, it has to be able to escape. So when I take a look at this window here, this gap that happens in this rubber gasket, because these rubber gaskets shrink, that gap is going to let water in. And that water could end up in here or end up in the building. So noting any openings in these would be very important. There's a sealant they could put on if they wanted to, or they could replace the rubber gasket with a whole new one. But watch for these openings, because that's very important in your exterior window inspection. Hospitality often has a type of window that's called a sliding collapsing window. So this is a whole window wall that would accompany this whole 12-foot wide span, and it collapses over. As an inspector, you can determine if you decide you want to open the window or not open the window. It's usually just unlock it and it moves pretty easy in its tracks, or you could ask somebody to open it for you. If you didn't open the window, then write on your report you did not open the window. But if you open the window, this is what we have. These are a thermal pane window, so I'll always watch for that gasket as well and make sure that thermal pane seal looks good. But beyond that, exercise the window and look for any issues. You'll know right away if you have an issue with the lintel above or anything, because the window will not slide. This track has to be perfectly parallel on the top and the bottom. Exercise or don't exercise, whatever you do, let your client know. Within overhead doors, we know there's a lot of different types. And we know that there's tilt-up doors, and tilt-up doors could be one single panel, or they could be a hinged multiple panel. These doors here on this hospitality building have a hinged tilt-up paneled overhead door. While it might not go all the way to the ground and be for vehicle access, it is an overhead door, and an overhead door company would be maintaining it. To operate this, you'd have to go inside. It's either got a key or a lockout. You'd either ask permission, have somebody do it for you, or you're just going to take a note of how it sits today. But this is a tilt-up hinged door. I don't know how many times I can reiterate, but I want to do it one more time. We don't have authority. We are here to make an educated list following the COMSOP for our clients. And in walking around the exteriors of this building here, this is in the pedestrian way. This is the entrance to the building. This is how the pedestrians go into this shop. But on this side of me, I have a gang entrance here down to the lower level. I don't know if downstairs has got an exit sign, and this is the exit, but there are A, no hand railings, and B, no guardrail across here to prevent anybody from stumbling down. Now, what you don't see in the broader picture is 25 yards in front of me is a child care center. And so I got a pedestrian place here, I've got pedestrian seating here, and I've got this. So I'm going to report that we don't have any guardrail or handrail protection on this lower area, and let my client determine what they want to do with that. When inspecting the stucco, you need to look for all of those key important elements, whether it's the control joints, whether it's sealant, whether it's impact marks, whether it's mechanical damage, and then of course the cracking. And one of the more unique cracks that might be present, and we'll have to get up close to see this, would be a spider type cracking. And it's a crack that largely resembles a web of a spider. And it's a crack that's not necessarily movement as much as it's cracking that's experiencing in the stucco from a lateral push or something going on. So watch our cracking. In this particular wall, I've got all kinds of other cracking to see, but this spider cracking was one that caught my eye and something I wanted to make sure I showed you, and make sure you look for all elements of the stucco for any other type of cracking that might be present. Just imagine you're a drop of water, and you've come down from the clouds and you're cascading down this wonderful stucco. But wait, instead of hitting the ground where you want to go, you get brought into beautiful holes like this. So watching all these horizontal to verticals, watching these openings, this is a spot that moisture is going to want to get into and will get into. So I will definitely want to take a photo of this. I can see the scratch code. I can see all of those wonderful things that installed the stucco. But now I'm going to have to go inside and verify that this south wall doesn't have any moisture problems, because I certainly don't see anything manifesting through this masonry. So watch these openings and make sure you note those on your report as well. Benchmarking a building is basically noting all the condition at a point in time. And the point in time is right now, today, during our inspection. And the benchmark that I want to draw note of is the fact that all of these lentils and the previous repair has been done across the south side of this building. How I know it's been done, a couple different reasons why. First, I look at the lentils. The lentils show no rust and they look brand new. Second, I can see all of the repaired and replaced masonry above the windows, and in this case it's highlighted in that lighter paint color. And then beyond that, I can see the repairs that have been done on the sides of these window frames. So it's important just to let your clients know that previous repairs have been done on the south side of the building. And in particular, if you want to go so far as to say, and the lentils have all been replaced, you can add qualifiers like keep monitoring or whatever. But what I'm going to put on my report is just a simple, a matter of the fact phrase of previous repairs have been performed on the south side of the building at the lentils of all of the windows. In so many of the articles and coursework that we've produced, we talk about the two real good types of exterior inspections, and that's the macro and micro approach. The macro being from a distance and the micro being up close. And in my macro approach and looking at this building, I'm immediately looking for that spot of interest that's right underneath that window. That spot of interest gives me all of the indications that that could be a bulge in the masonry. Now, the only way I'm going to know truly if that's a bulge is to get up towards the micro approach to it. But from the macro, I've taken note of it. So now let's go see if we can get closer and look at the micro look at that building. When I've concluded my macro approach, now I get to come a little closer and do my micro approach. And again, I might not be able to get up on it, but I'm looking for plumb level, square and straight. And as I come to this building and I'm looking vertically up and looking at the straightness and plumbness of the building, I can actually see that this really truly is, while not the quintessential textbook of what a bulge looks like, it is certainly displacement and bulging of those bricks. And so think about macro and think about micro when you're looking at the exteriors of these buildings. I think that'll help you out and help you identify if there's any conditions going on. So I've just made a 4 or 8 block walk, walking down alleys, walking in front of buildings through my hometown. I've looked at a lot of different siding materials. I've looked at a lot of different windows, a lot of different doors, and I'm feeling really confident that I can go out and I can inspect just about any one of these buildings. Heck, it's my hometown. I'll probably get called to inspect a few of these. And so I've even gotten a heads up the next time I get called. I know all the back of all the buildings from the alleys. I know where I've got my access points. Boy, I really encourage anybody watching these videos to consider doing this in your hometown, or the hometown next to where you're at, or the next time you go and have lunch somewhere and you got an hour to spend between inspections, go walk the buildings, see what you see. And if you find anything that you want to note of and you have a question, reach out to us, reach out to a mentor. We have a mentoring program. But nonetheless, follow the CommSop and do great commercial inspections.